You were never going to be his wife.
You were never going to be his wife, Leonora. You were always going to be his problem, and I simply solved it before he could discover that for himself. Dorinda Pierce said it the way one comments on the weather in September, mildly, with a small tilt of her golden head, as though the words were not a confession to 18 months of systematic destruction. She stood at the window of the Dower House parlor, backlit by the flat gray light of a November coast, and she looked as she always looked, like a woman painted specifically to be admired from across a room. Leonora did not move. She had learned in the sanatorium at Whitstable that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was move too quickly. Instead, she pressed the pad of her thumb against the edge of her thumbnail, hard enough to feel the ridge of it, and she breathed not slowly, which would have looked deliberate, but evenly, which looked like nothing at all. She had become very good at looking like nothing at all. 18 months of practice. "You locked me away," Leonora said. "Not a question. I had you treated." Dorinda turned from the window. Her smile was the particular smile of a woman who has rehearsed her justifications so many times they have begun to feel like virtue. "You were distraught after Father died. You said things in public, Nora, about the estate, in public, that would have embarrassed the family." Dr. Pelham agreed that a period of quiet was best. Dr. Pelham. Leonora pressed her thumbnail harder and thought about Dr. Pelham's ledger. She had found it 6 hours ago. She had not yet told anyone she had found it. She would not tell Dorinda. The injustice had a date, the way all truly deliberate injustices do. The 14th of March, 1814, a Tuesday. Their father, Sir Aldous Pierce, had been dead 11 days, and his will had been read the previous afternoon in a solicitor's office that smelled of tallow and old wool. The will left everything: the Kentish estate, the house in Bath, the small but respectable income in equal share between his 2 daughters, with Leonora as the elder, holding the power of management until such time as she married. It was, Dorinda had said later, terribly unfair to the younger sister. What Dorinda had not said, what she had instead done, with the cold efficiency of a woman who has always known exactly how the world works and decided to make it work for her, was arrange a private appointment with Dr. Pelham of the Whitstable Rest Institution for Ladies of Nervous Disposition, provide him with a signed letter from a man she represented as the family physician. He was, in fact, a retired apothecary in Dorinda's pocket, and describe, in sympathetic and heartbreaking detail, the elder Miss Pierce's increasingly alarming behavior since their father's death. On the 15th of March, 2 men had arrived at the Pierce house in Bath. Leonora, who had been writing letters to their father's solicitor demanding an accounting of the estate's debts, had been helped into a carriage. They used that word, helped. She had not seen Dorinda again for 18 months. At that time, Dorinda had married Henry Carew, the Duke of Renmore. Leonora had not known about the Duke until the 5th month of her confinement, when a kitchen maid named Polly, 18 years old and kind in the careless, unconsidered way of someone who has never needed to calculate the cost of kindness, whispered it through the locked door during the dinner hour. "Your sister's in all the papers, miss. Married a duke, she has. A real one." Leonora had sat down on the cold flagstone floor and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. She understood then what Dorinda had been solving. Henry Carew had been engaged, not formally, not yet, but understood by everyone who mattered, to be engaged to Leonora Pierce for 4 months before Sir Aldous died. A quiet thing, a careful thing, built between a father who respected the Duke and a Duke who had sat across a dinner table from Leonora and said, with the careful restraint of a man who chooses each word like a stone to build with, I think, Miss Pierce, that you and I understand the world in rather the same way. By the standards of the time, it was practically a declaration. And then Sir Aldous died, and Leonora was helped into a carriage, and Dorinda, who had been present at that dinner, who had watched that exchange across the table with her beautiful, calculating eyes, had written to the Duke of Renmore to express the family's grief and her own hope that they might lean upon His Grace's steadiness in this difficult time. She had been so genuinely devastated, so softly beautiful in her mourning dress, so utterly unlike her difficult and unfortunately unwell elder sister, that the Duke had believed every word. He had been told by the lovely woman's physician that the elder sister's nervous collapse was quite serious and might, one feared, be permanent. Leonora had escaped the sanatorium on the 3rd of September, 1815, not because anyone came for her, but because she had spent 6 weeks observing that doctor. Pelham's assistant, a young man named Price with ambitions above his station and a habit of reading patients' outgoing letters before burning them, had recently begun not burning all of them. She had noticed this because she noticed everything. For 18 months, the way a woman notices everything when noticing is the only power she has left. She presented young Mr. Price with a choice: arrange her transfer paperwork to show a voluntary discharge dated the previous Thursday, accept her silence on the matter of the letters he had been selling to a gossip printer in town, or face the consequences of Leonora taking that intelligence directly to Dr. Pelham himself. She was out of the carriage and walking through the village before Price had finished blinking. She had also, while Price was collecting her belongings, taken 5 minutes alone in Dr. Pelham's consulting office. The ledger was on the 3rd shelf. The original admission entry for Miss L. Pierce was dated the 15th of March, 1814, and signed by 2 physicians. One of those signatures had been written over an erasure. The ink was different, blacker, newer. The original signature, ghosting through the page when she held it to the light, was not a physician's at all. She recognized the hand immediately. She tore out the page at the binding, folded it twice, and placed it in the lining of her left boot. She had been wearing it against her ankle for 6 weeks, through a borrowed room in Whitstable, a coach to Maidstone, a letter written and rewritten until it said exactly what it needed to say, and then here to the dower house on the edge of the Renmore estate, which everyone had forgotten about because Dorinda had wanted them to, and which was therefore the last place Dorinda would think to look for her. She had arrived 2 days ago. Dorinda had found her this morning. And now they were standing in the flat November light, and Dorinda was explaining, with the patience of a woman who had already won, that Leonora had always been going to be a problem. Leonora had been in the dower house's small private library, a single crowded room that smelled of damp cloth and the particular sweetness of paper that has not been opened in years when she heard the front door. She had come down the narrow stair with a copy of Practical Observations on the Use of Drainage in Agricultural Estates under her arm, because she had been reading it to understand what had been done with the land since she lost it, and she had found Dorinda in the parlor, looking at the cold grate, with the expression of a woman who has arrived to be reasonable at someone. Now Dorinda was looking at the book with a small frown. You always did read the most extraordinary things. Father used to say, you had a man's mind. He meant it as a compliment. I never thought it was. Man. I know, Leonora said. You cannot stay here, Nora. I am staying here. It is the dower house, the residence of the widows and unmarried women of the Renmore estate. I am an unmarried woman. You are a woman who left a private medical institution without authorization. I left with a signed discharge. A flicker crossed Dorinda's face, very small. That is not possible. Dr. Pelham would not have. Dr. Pelham did not. His assistant did. And before you consider whether Mr. Price might be persuaded to say otherwise, I would remind you that I have spent 18 months in a room with nothing to do but think, and I have thought about this conversation quite extensively. Leonora set the drainage book on the small table beside the cold fireplace. Her hands were steady. She had made them steady. I want to speak to the Duke. Dorinda's expression went very, very smooth. The most dangerous expression she owned. Henry, she said, is in London. Then I will wait. He was not in London. Leonora discovered this at 3:30, when she was crossing the kitchen garden. The dower house and the main estate shared a wall and a gate that had been unlocked for 30 years on a hinge that nobody oiled, and she heard from the other side a voice she had heard precisely 11 times in her life and had not, she was discovering, forgotten. She stopped, put her hand on the cold stone of the gate. He was talking to a child, a boy, from the pitch of the answering voice, 8 or 9 years old. A tenant's child, she thought, from the accent. But how does it know which way is north? The boy was asking. It doesn't, said the Duke. It doesn't know anything. It simply aligns with a force it cannot see and cannot explain, and it trusts that the alignment is correct. That sounds frightening. I think, said the Duke after a pause, that it might be the only honest thing about it. Leonora stood at the gate for a long moment. Then she went back to the dower house, sat down at the small desk in the library, and wrote a note in 3 sentences. She gave it to the serving girl with instructions and 2 shillings, changed into the better of her 2 dresses, which was not saying much, but it was what she had, and sat in the window watching the light leave the November garden. At 5:30, the note came back. I will come at 6 o'clock. I would prefer to come alone. W. He looked older. She had thought about that in the sanatorium, turned it over during the long winter nights, whether absence changes what a face means to us or only what we notice in it. She had decided, somewhere around the 8th month, that it does not change the face, it changes the look. He came in from the garden gate, crossed the kitchen garden in the falling dark, and she watched him from the upstairs window until he passed beneath the eave. Then she heard his step on the stair, and then he was in the doorway of the library. He stopped when he saw her. He was holding her note in his left hand. He had not put it down. Miss Pierce, he said. It was interesting, Leonora thought, how much could live in 2 words. She heard relief in them, and shame, and the beginning of an anger that was not at her, but at what her presence meant about the last 18 months, and what he had not known about them. Your Grace, she said. He came into the room, sat down, without asking, in the chair across from hers. He looked at her face the way a man looks at something he is trying to determine the full truth of before he speaks. Your sister told me you were in the country for your health. I was in Whitstable. Leonora pulled the folded page from the small bag on the desk beside her. She had not been able to leave it in her boot any longer. The ink had begun to blur at the fold from the warmth of her skin. She smoothed it once and held it out. In Dr. Pelham's institution, for 18 months, I was committed on the basis of this admission document. I would like you to look at the physician's counter-signature. He took the page. He had large hands, she had noticed that before. At dinner, at the way he held his wine glass, with the careful grip of a man who does not entirely trust himself not to break things. He read the page. She watched him read it. She watched the moment he saw what she had seen. This signature, he said, was not a physician. It was Dorinda's, written over the original, which belonged to a retired apothecary she had paid. You can see the erasure if you hold it to the lamp. Ha! He held it to the lamp. A long silence. She told me, he said, and his voice was very quiet. The quietness of a man pressing down hard on something that you had suffered a complete collapse. That the physicians agreed you were in no state to receive visitors. That correspondence would only distress you. That you had requested, yourself, that you not be contacted. He set the paper down on the table between them. I believed her. You had no reason not to. I had written to you 17 letters, Miss Pierce, between March and August of 1814. I received 17 replies, all in a hand I was told was your companion's, all saying essentially the same thing, that you were grateful for my concern, that you were improving, and that you preferred not to continue the correspondence. Leonora looked at him. I never received 17 letters, she said. The silence was the loudest thing that had happened in that room in years. He stood, 2 steps to the window, one hand on the frame, looking out at the darkness of the garden. The lamp lit the line of his jaw and left the rest of him in shadow, and Leonora thought about compasses, about forces invisible and unexplained, about what it means to align yourself with something you cannot see. There is a charity committee meeting tomorrow morning, he said without turning, in the village. My wife is chairing it. Half the county will be present. She considers it essential to be seen as beneficent, unquote. I know, Leonora said. That is why I came now, and not later. He turned. He looked at her, really looked. The full weight of it, the look she had first felt 3 years ago across a dinner table and had not been able to properly name until this moment. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Every date, every name, every specific thing you know. I have a ledger page, a retired apothecary's name, and a young man named Price, who sold patients' letters to a gossip printer and will not want that known. She paused. And I have 17 letters that were written to me and never delivered, which I suspect were answered by someone with access to my handwriting on old correspondence. My wife, he said, very level, very final. Your wife, Leonora agreed. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the November wind came off the coast and pressed against the window pane. Somewhere below, the gate in the kitchen garden swung on its unoiled hinge. Leonora, he said. She had not expected her name. Not without the miss. Not in that register, the one that lives below propriety. In the place where things are simply true. I know what I am asking, she said, before he could continue. I know what it costs. I don't think you do. He crossed the room, stopped at the edge of the lamplight, close enough that she could see his expression clearly, which was not tenderness, not yet, but something adjacent to it, something that had been waiting in a sealed room for 18 months and had just heard the key. Because you are calculating the cost to you, which is what you have been forced to do for a very long time. But I have been sitting in a house I don't recognize, beside a woman I don't understand, having refused every instinct I possess for nearly 2 years, and I am very tired of being reasonable about it. Leonora looked at him for a long moment. The committee meeting is at 10, she said. Yes. Then we have until morning to be sure of everything." He pulled his chair around to sit beside her, rather than across, and they spread the papers between them on the small table, and the lamp burned low, and neither of them mentioned how close they were sitting, or the way his hand came to rest, once, briefly, on top of hers when she described the night the two men had come, and how she had pressed her hand back against his, and neither of them mentioned that either. Outside, the wind. Inside, the quiet, serious, total attention of two people who had been waiting a very long time to be in the same room. The village committee room smelled of beeswax and new wool, and the barely concealed ambition of 14 women who each believed herself the most important person on the charitable committee of Renmore Parish. Dorinda sat at the head of the long table in pale blue, her hair dressed perfectly, explaining the distribution plan for the Winter Coal Fund with the smooth authority of a woman who has been a duchess for 14 months and has decided the role suits her extremely well. She did not see him until he was already in the room. Henry Carew, the Duke of Renmore, walked in at 12 minutes past 10, not loudly, without drama. He walked in the way a man walks into a room he owns, as if the room had simply always been waiting for him, and the women at the table turned one by one, the way grass turns in a wind, until Dorinda was the last to turn, and found him at the end of the room, looking at her with an expression of absolute stillness. In his left hand, held flat so that the contents were visible to everyone at the table, was a doctor's ledger page. In his right, a packet of letters bound in ribbons, 17 of them, still in his own hand, which he set down in the center of the table with the deliberateness of a man making an argument through objects rather than words, so that the solicitor now standing at the doorway could see them clearly, and the two magistrates' wives at the far end could see them clearly, and Dorinda could see them clearly. He said into the silence, "I owe this committee an explanation. I owe this county an explanation, and I intend to make both, publicly, before this week is out." He looked at Dorinda, very calm, the kind of calm that has mass to it, that takes up space in a room the way shouting never does. "But first," he said, "I believe there is someone you should see." He turned to the door. Leonora walked in. She wore her plain gray dress, no adornments, and she had not tried to make herself look more than she was, because she did not need to. She walked to the end of the table and stood beside the Duke and looked at her sister with the clear, quiet steadiness of a woman who has survived 18 months of confinement on nothing but her own intelligence and come out the other side with every piece of the puzzle in her hand. Dorinda's face went through 3 expressions in 4 seconds. Then she said, with the last of her composure, "You have no proof of anything that would—" "The ledger page," said the solicitor from the doorway, in a clear and carrying voice. "The admission's signature can be compared with any document bearing Miss Pierce's handwriting from the period in question. We have 3 such documents here. We also have a statement, prepared this morning, from a Mr. Price, formerly assistant to Dr. Pelham of Whitstable, regarding the interception and answering of correspondence addressed to a patient." He paused. "With the timing of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. Correspondence addressed to Miss Leonora Pierce, from the Duke of Renmore, between March and August of 1814. "And from the registrar's office," said the Duke, still looking at Dorinda, still in the same quiet register. "We are expecting confirmation by this afternoon that a certain property deed filed in January 1814 was amended after filing. The original clerk has a good memory." Dorinda stood. She was still beautiful. Even now, composed in the way that had always made Leonora feel like something unfinished by comparison. She looked around the table at 14 women who were perfectly still, watching with the bright, horrified attention of people witnessing something they will describe for the rest of their lives, and she understood Leonora could see the exact moment she understood that there was no version of this morning from which she emerged intact. She left the room. The Duke let her go. He watched the door close, and then he turned and his face changed. That was the only way Leonora could describe it, later, to herself. It changed. Everything he had held level for the benefit of the room moved, all of it toward her. And what was left on his face was something entirely unguarded, something she did not have a word for yet, something that made her chest feel like a window opened after a very long winter. "All right," he said, quietly, just for her. "Yes," she said. "I think I might be, actually." His hand found hers at her side, not for the room. None of the room was looking at anything but the door, and held it, with the careful grip of a man who does not trust himself not to break things, and who is deciding, deliberately, not to be careful anymore. 7 months later, June. The solicitor's office in Maidstone had been repainted. Leonora noticed this on the morning of the final settlement hearing. The walls were now a pale straw color instead of the old tallow and shadow they had been, and the room smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, which she chose to take as a sign. She sat at the long table with the Duke on her left and her own solicitor, her own, a thing she had insisted upon, on her right, and they went through the documents with the thoroughness she had always intended when she was writing those first letters to her father's estate manager, before 2 men had come and helped her into a carriage. The estate was hers. Half of it always had been. The bathhouse was in her name. She did not need it, as it happened. She had, in February, married the Duke in the village church at Renmore on a bright, cold morning with frost on the lich gate and the smell of beeswax candles. She wore a dress the color of the November sea because she was no longer the sort of woman who wore things for other people's approval, and she stood at the altar with her hand in his large, careful hand, and said the words with the clear directness of someone who has learned that politeness never protected her, and that it is always better to mean what you say. She had kept the agricultural drainage book. She had also read 3 more. After the hearing, they walked down to the river. He held her hand. She watched the June light fragment and reassembled on the moving water, and she thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, about compasses, about forces invisible and unexplained, about what it means to align yourself with something you cannot see and trust that the alignment is correct. She had spent 18 months being told she was a problem. She was not a problem. She was simply someone her sister had underestimated, which was a mistake Dorinda would have the considerable leisure of a legal proceeding in which to contemplate. The Duke said nothing. He did not need to. He was a man who had learned to say very little, and beside him, Leonora thought in the private voice she used for things she would not say aloud, but meant completely. I am not a problem. I am not a nervous disposition. I am not a woman who can be solved. I am exactly who I always was, and I am exactly where I belong. That moment when Leonora walked through the door of the committee room in her plain gray dress, with no adornments and nothing to prove, after 18 months of being told she was too much and not enough, and entirely the wrong kind of woman, that is where this story lives. Not the legal victory, not the marriage, that entrance. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe, not because I make Regency romance, but because these are the specific stories I want to keep building. Women who survived not through rescue, but through noticing, through remembering, through the slow, patient accumulation of evidence in the face of people who told them their perception could not be trusted. And for the comments, one question, and I genuinely want your answer. If someone had spent years constructing a version of you, a diagnosis, a reputation, a story that kept everyone who might help you at a careful distance, what would it take for you to trust that someone who arrived late was still worth trusting at all?